If you have ever taken an antidepressant and felt like something still was not quite right, you were not imagining it. If you have ever sat in a doctor's office and nodded along to the chemical imbalance explanation, while something in you quietly wondered if that was really the whole story, that instinct was not wrong. In 2022, researchers at University College London published a comprehensive review of decades of serotonin research. Their conclusion was simple and devastating. There is no consistent evidence that depression is caused by low serotonin. Not a small study, not a fringe opinion. 1 million downloads. Global headlines. Scientists who had taught this theory to their own students saying publicly that everything they thought they knew had been flipped upside down. But here is what none of those headlines told you. 90% of your serotonin has never been in your brain, it is in your gut. And the bacteria living there are the ones running the production line. The story of depression did not end in 2022. It just moved to a place nobody thought to look. Let's go back to where this all started. Picture this. It is sometime in the 1990s. Maybe you are a teenager. Maybe you are a parent. Maybe you are sitting across from a doctor who has just handed you a pamphlet with a diagram of two synapses, one healthy and bright, one sad and depleted. The doctor says something like, depression is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, specifically low serotonin. This medication helps correct that. And something about that explanation lands. Not because it was suspicious, but because it was the first time someone gave a name to what you had been carrying. Low serotonin. That is why. That is the reason you are not weak, you are not dramatic. Your brain simply does not make enough of a specific chemical. For millions of people, that explanation was not just information, it was relief. So what happened? The chemical imbalance theory, specifically the idea that low serotonin causes depression, was first proposed in the 1960s when the first antidepressants were being developed. At the time, researchers noticed that these drugs seemed to affect serotonin levels. The assumption followed, if raising serotonin helps, then low serotonin must be the problem. Here's the thing about assumptions. They have a way of becoming facts before anyone checks the evidence. For decades, this idea spread through medical schools, through pharmaceutical advertising, through millions of conversations in doctors' offices and kitchen tables and group chats. The chemical imbalance became the story. SSR is selective serotonin. Reuptake inhibitors became the most prescribed class of psychiatric medication in the world, not because the science was airtight, because the story made sense. And then in July 2022, Dr. Joanna Moncrief and her team at University College London decided to actually check the evidence. They conducted what is called an umbrella review, the highest level of evidence synthesis available in science, a review of systematic reviews and meta-analyses. They looked at 6 different areas of serotonin research: serotonin levels in body fluids, serotonin receptor alterations, serotonin transporter levels, tryptophan depletion studies, genetic associations, 6 different angles, decades of literature. Their conclusion? No consistent evidence of a relationship between serotonin and depression. Not the relationship is complicated, not we need more research. No consistent evidence. The paper was downloaded over 1 million times. One co-author, Dr. Mark Horowitz, said publicly, and these are his words, I had been taught that depression was caused by low serotonin in my psychiatry training, and had even taught this to students in my own lectures. Being involved in this research was eye-opening, and feels like everything I thought I knew has been flipped upside down. A psychiatrist saying that. Now, before anyone reading this starts drafting a furious comment about antidepressants, let's be precise about what this actually means and what it does not. This does not mean antidepressants do not work. Many people's lives have genuinely been changed by them. What it means is that the explanation underneath the low serotonin story was never the full picture. The drugs may be doing something real without doing what we thought they were doing. That is a strange and uncomfortable idea, but it is the honest one. What it also means is that if the chemical imbalance story was incomplete, the actual story of depression has to be somewhere else. And this is where things get genuinely strange. Because while the world was reacting to the serotonin myth being dismantled, the most interesting serotonin story of all was sitting somewhere nobody was looking. 90%, let that sit for a second. 9 out of every 10 serotonin molecules in your body are not floating around your brain. They are in your digestive tract, produced there, stored there, regulated there by bacteria. This is not a fringe claim. This is confirmed by Caltech, UCLA Health, and multiple peer-reviewed sources. An estimated 90% of the body's serotonin is produced in the gut. The specific cells responsible are called enterochromaffin cells, cells lining your intestinal walls. And the gut bacteria living around those cells directly influence how much serotonin those cells produce. Think about what that means for a moment. For decades, the depression conversation was entirely about serotonin in the brain. And 90% of the serotonin in your body was somewhere else the entire time. It is a little like spending years looking for your keys inside the house when they were in the garden the whole time. Not because anyone was lying, because nobody thought to look outside. Now, right here is where most people making videos about this topic quietly change the subject. Because what comes next is the part that actually explains everything, and it is also the part that requires us to sit with something slightly uncomfortable. So stay with this, because this next part is the reason this video exists. Gut serotonin does not cross the blood-brain barrier. The serotonin your gut produces cannot pack a bag, wave goodbye, and travel up to your brain to fix your mood. The brain makes its own serotonin from its own supply line, separately. So if 90% of your serotonin is sitting in your gut and cannot reach your brain, why are we talking about it? What is the actual connection between what is happening in your digestive tract and what you feel when you wake up at 3 in the morning, convinced that nothing is ever going to be okay? Here is where it gets dark and real, and genuinely unlike anything you have been told before. There is an amino acid called tryptophan. You have probably heard of it. People mention it every Thanksgiving when they blame the turkey for making them sleepy. What nobody mentions at Thanksgiving dinner is that tryptophan is also the single most important raw material your brain uses to manufacture serotonin. Without enough tryptophan crossing into your brain cannot make the serotonin it needs. There is no workaround, there is no backup plan. Your brain is dependent on a supply line it does not control. Now here is where your gut bacteria walk back into the room. The bacteria living in your gut directly influence how much tryptophan makes it across the blood-brain barrier and into your brain. They compete for it. They metabolize it. They regulate how it travels. Think of tryptophan as a delivery truck headed to a factory, and your gut bacteria as the traffic controllers deciding whether that truck gets through. When your gut microbiome is healthy and balanced, those traffic controllers are cooperative. Enough tryptophan gets through. Your brain has what it needs. But here is what happens when the gut microbiome is disrupted by chronic stress, by poor diet, by antibiotics, by the kind of sustained low-grade inflammation that modern life has quietly normalized. The traffic controllers go rogue. When there is chronic inflammation in the body, the kind that a disrupted gut microbiome both causes and feeds, a specific enzyme gets switched on. Its name is IDO, indoleamine 2,3-dioxygenase. And when IDO gets activated, it does something that should make everyone who has ever been told they have a chemical imbalance sit up and pay attention. It hijacks the tryptophan truck. Instead of tryptophan heading to the brain to become serotonin, IDO reroutes it down an entirely different road. Scientists call it the kynurenine pathway. And what gets produced at the end of that road is not serotonin. It is a set of metabolites, biological compounds, some of which are genuinely neurotoxic. They cross into the brain, they drive neuroinflammation. They interfere directly with the brain regions responsible for mood, motivation, and the ability to feel pleasure. And they have been found in significantly higher concentrations in people with depression. Let that breathe for a second. Because here's what this actually means in plain language. In a person with a disrupted gut microbiome and chronic inflammation, the tryptophan, that should have become serotonin in the brain, is instead being converted into compounds that damage the brain's ability to regulate mood. The factory is not just running low on materials. Someone is actively redirecting the supply truck and sending toxic waste back in its place. That is not a chemical imbalance. That is a sabotage. A quiet, invisible, biological sabotage that starts in the gut, travels through an inflammatory cascade, hijacks a raw material supply chain, and ends inside the very brain regions responsible for whether you feel like yourself or not. And here is the part that is genuinely hard to sit with, because it is not abstract, and it is not theoretical, and most people watching this video have experienced some version of it without ever knowing what they were experiencing. Think about the last time your life got really hard. Not sad movie hard, actually hard. The kind where sleep stopped coming easily, where food became whatever was closest, where exercise felt like a joke, where the stress sat in your body like a low hum that never fully switched off. Now think about what happened to your mood. Not immediately, not the first week, but after. The heaviness that settled in, the fog, the flatness that felt different from sadness, almost physical, almost structural, like something had shifted in the machinery underneath your emotions. That was not weakness. That was not your personality. That was this, happening in real time. Chronic stress disrupting your gut microbiome. Your disrupted microbiome triggering inflammation. That inflammation switching on IDO, and then IDO proceeds to hijack the tryptophan. Your brain running low on the raw material it needs. And neurotoxic kynurenine byproducts, accumulating in the very regions of your brain responsible for mood, your gut, your bacteria, your inflammation, your tryptophan, your brain, all of them connected, all of them talking, and not one of those conversations appearing on the pamphlet with the 2 synapses that someone handed you in a doctor's office 20 years ago. Now here's where the research is right now, and this part matters because it changes how we think about what comes next. A 2023 paper published in the Journal of Affective Disorders found that the gut microbiome of patients with major depression is distinct and measurably changes with SSRI treatment. Specific microbial genera, Blautia, Coprococcus, and Bifidobacterium, may serve as markers predicting how well someone responds to antidepressants, not just as side effects of the medication, as part of the mechanism. Which raises a question nobody has a full answer to yet, but nobody can stop thinking about. Are antidepressants working partly through the gut? Is some of what we attributed to brain chemistry actually happening in the microbiome? And there is one more piece that needs to be said here, because it connects to something very real that a lot of people experience. What makes this issue particularly difficult is that none of it is visible. No scan shows a disrupted microbiome. No blood test flags a hijacked tryptophan pathway. You just feel heavy. You just feel flat. And because nobody can point to anything, the assumption becomes, it must be you. Your thinking, your attitude, your inability to just push through. When the real conversation was happening somewhere, your doctor was not paying attention to. That was not coincidence. That was biology your doctor did not have the tools to see yet. Your mood, your gut, your stress, your bacteria, all of them in conversation the entire time. And here is what makes this moment in science genuinely rare. We are not at the end of a discovery, we are at the beginning of one. The researchers mapping this pathway right now are not closing a chapter. They are opening one that could permanently change how depression is diagnosed, treated, and understood. Which means the most important thing this video can leave you with is not a fix. It is a question worth carrying. If the story you were told about your own brain was always incomplete, what else might be worth looking at? The Moncrief Review, as powerful as it was, has been critiqued by other scientists who argue the methodology was selective and the conclusions overstated. The honest position is not serotonin has nothing to do with depression. It is that the simple, low serotonin story was never sufficient, and the evidence for it was always thinner than the marketing suggested. The gut tryptophan kynurenine connection is real and growing in the literature. But we are still in the early chapters of understanding exactly which bacteria, which inflammatory triggers, and which metabolic shifts are most responsible. This is not a completed map. It is a map being drawn in real time. And no, changing your diet alone is not a cure for clinical depression. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. What the research suggests is that the gut is a legitimate target for future treatment, not a magic fix available today. Nobody told them to look at the pipes. And that silence cost people years, not years of weakness, years of searching in the wrong place because nobody handed them a better question. You now have a better question. It is not finished. The answers are still being written, but you are standing somewhere most people have never stood, on the right side of an understanding that medicine is only just beginning to take seriously. That is not a small thing. If this video moved something in you, subscribe. Because next week we go deeper into territory that is going to shift something else you thought you already understood. And drop a comment. Not because the algorithm needs it, because we genuinely want to know what landed.